The screaming stopped after 7 seconds. The fire kept burning for 3 minutes. It's June 15, 1944. Saipan, a tropical island in the Pacific that's become a living hell. American Marines are advancing through dense jungle toward a Japanese fortified position, a concrete pillbox built into the hillside with walls 3 feet thick. Machine gun fire pours from the narrow firing slit, cutting down Marines who get anywhere close. Grenades bounce off the reinforced concrete. Bazooka rounds create small craters but don't penetrate. The position is impregnable. Then a figure emerges from the tree line. He's carrying a weapon that looks like it belongs in a nightmare. 2 cylinders strapped to his back, connected to a rifle-like device with a long nozzle. He moves closer to the pillbox, within 30 yards, 20 yards, 15. The Japanese machine gunners adjust their aim toward him, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. Then he pulls the trigger. A stream of liquid fire shoots from the nozzle like a dragon's breath. It's not just fire, it's a coherent jet of burning gel that arcs through the air and pours directly through the pillbox firing slit. Inside that concrete box, the temperature instantly jumps to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The screaming starts immediately. The machine gun falls silent. The fire continues to burn, consuming everything inside that enclosed space, feeding on the oxygen the defenders need to breathe. This is the flamethrower, the most psychologically devastating weapon of World War II. A weapon so terrifying that soldiers would rather face machine guns, artillery, even poison gas than encounter a man carrying this fire-spitting machine. A weapon that breaks something fundamental in the human mind, because fire isn't just death, it's agony. It's primordial fear coded into our DNA from a million years of evolution. But here's what makes this weapon even more disturbing. The flamethrower wasn't some desperate last-minute invention. It was carefully engineered, systematically developed, and deliberately designed to exploit the deepest psychological fears humans possess. The scientists and engineers who created it understood exactly what they were building. A weapon that doesn't just kill enemies, a weapon that terrorizes them into surrender before the first shot is ever fired. And today, you're going to discover the hidden history of this nightmare weapon. How it was created, why it worked so devastatingly well, what it was like to carry one into battle, and why soldiers who used flamethrowers rarely talked about it afterward, even decades later. Because some weapons change you, and the flamethrower changed everyone who came near it. The story of the military flamethrower begins much earlier than World War II. It begins in ancient times, with Greek fire, the mysterious incendiary weapon that the Byzantine Empire used to incinerate enemy ships. It continues through medieval sieges, where defenders would pour burning oil on attackers. Humans have weaponized fire for as long as we've known how to make it. Fire is the oldest weapon, the most primal weapon. But turning fire into a portable, controllable battlefield weapon required modern engineering. The first true military flamethrower was developed by a German engineer named Richard Fiedler in 1901. Fiedler understood a fundamental problem with weaponized fire. You can't just spray burning liquid. It won't travel far enough, won't burn hot enough, won't stick to targets. Fiedler's breakthrough was creating a pressurized system that could project ignited fuel in a sustained stream that could reach targets 30 to 40 meters away. His design used compressed nitrogen to pressurize the fuel tank, forcing the fuel through a nozzle where it was ignited by an electrical spark or pilot light. The German army tested Fiedler's design extensively before World War I, and by 1915 they deployed flamethrower units against Allied trenches on the Western Front. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Allied soldiers who survived flamethrower attacks described feeling primal panic, unlike anything they'd experienced from conventional weapons. Something about seeing a stream of fire coming toward you, knowing that if it touches you, you'll burn alive, breaks combat discipline. Soldiers would abandon their positions and run rather than face the flames. But those early flamethrowers had serious limitations. They were heavy, requiring 2 operators to carry and deploy. They had extremely short range, maybe 30 meters maximum. They carried only enough fuel for about 10 seconds of continuous firing, and they made the operators obvious, slow-moving targets. German flamethrower troops in World War I suffered casualty rates exceeding 80%. The weapon was effective, but using it was practically a suicide mission. After World War I, military engineers around the world studied the flamethrower, trying to improve its effectiveness while reducing the vulnerability of the operators. The fundamental challenge was balancing several competing requirements. You wanted maximum range, which required high fuel pressure. You wanted sustained firing time, which required large fuel capacity. You wanted the fuel to stick to targets and burn intensely, which required specialized fuel formulas. And you wanted the whole system to be light enough for one soldier to carry into combat. These requirements contradicted each other. Higher pressure meant heavier tanks, more fuel meant more weight. Better fuel formulas were often more volatile and dangerous to carry. But by the 1930s, as the world lurched toward another global war, several nations had developed significantly improved flamethrower designs. The Germans created the flamethrower 35, a one-man portable system that could fire for 10 seconds at ranges up to 25 meters. The British developed the AK-Pack, later replaced by the flamethrower portable No. 2, known as the Lifebuoy because its cylindrical fuel tanks resembled a life preserver. The Americans created the M1 and M1A1 flamethrowers, which became the most widely used flamethrowers of the Pacific War. So, how exactly did these weapons work? What was happening mechanically when a soldier pulled that trigger and sent fire streaming toward the enemy? The basic design consisted of 3 main components. First, the fuel tanks, typically 2 or 3 cylinders worn on the operator's back like a backpack, containing a mixture of thickened gasoline or oil. Second, a pressurization system, either compressed nitrogen in a separate tank or a mechanical pump that the operator would activate before firing. Third, the projection system, consisting of fuel lines, valves, an ignition system, and the nozzle assembly that the operator aimed like a rifle. When the operator pulled the trigger, several things happened in rapid sequence. The trigger opened a valve, allowing pressurized fuel to flow from the tanks through the fuel line toward the nozzle. As the fuel reached the nozzle assembly, it passed through an ignition point, where either an electrical arc or a burning pilot flame would ignite the fuel stream. The ignited fuel then shot from the nozzle as a coherent jet of fire, traveling in an arc toward the target. But the real secret wasn't in the mechanical system. The real secret was in the fuel itself. Early flamethrowers used plain gasoline or oil, which burned but didn't stick to targets. If you sprayed burning gasoline at someone, much of it would run off before causing serious burns. Soldiers could sometimes escape by rolling on the ground to extinguish the flames. So military chemists began experimenting with fuel additives that would make the burning liquid stick like napalm. Yes, napalm. That word that's become synonymous with the horror of modern warfare. But do you know where napalm came from? Napalm was invented in 1942 by a team of Harvard chemists led by Louis Pfizer. The name comes from its chemical components, naphthenic and palmitic acids mixed with gasoline to create a gel that sticks to surfaces and burns at extremely high temperatures. When you add napalm thickeners to gasoline, you get a substance that's almost like liquid fire, flowing like thick syrup, adhering to whatever it touches and burning intensely for several minutes. This was the fuel that made the flamethrower truly nightmarish. The M1A1 flamethrower used by American forces carried about 4 gallons of napalm fuel in its 2 tanks. 4 gallons doesn't sound like much. But 4 gallons of napalm, properly deployed, could clear an entire enemy bunker, kill dozens of defenders, and render the position permanently uninhabitable from the toxic fumes and residual burning. If you're fascinated by hidden WW2 secrets like this, make sure to like the video. Now imagine you're a soldier selected for flamethrower duty. You probably didn't volunteer for this job. Most flamethrower operators were assigned the role because they were physically strong enough to carry the 68-pound weapon system and mentally resilient enough to handle what they'd have to do with it. You receive special training, separate from regular infantry training, because operating a flamethrower requires skills and knowledge that normal soldiers don't need. First, you learn how to pressurize the system. The M1A1 uses compressed hydrogen gas in a small cylinder to pressurize the fuel tanks. You have to understand how to check the pressure gauge, how to open and close the valves properly, how to avoid overpressurizing, which could cause a catastrophic rupture. You practice this over and over until you can do it by feel, in the dark, under stress, because in combat you won't have time to think about it. Then you learn about the fuel. How to fill the tanks without spilling, because spilled napalm on your uniform or skin could ignite if you're careless with the pilot light. How to check for leaks, because a fuel leak combined with the ignition system means you're wearing a bomb on your back. How to maintain the correct fuel mixture, because napalm that's too thick won't flow properly, and napalm that's too thin won't stick to targets. Next comes firing training. The flamethrower doesn't shoot like a rifle. The fuel stream arcs, affected by wind, temperature, and pressure variations. You have to learn to aim high and let the stream arc down onto targets. You practice estimating range, because the fuel stream loses coherence at maximum distance, breaking up into flaming droplets that don't have the same devastating effect as a solid jet of fire. You learn to fire in short bursts to conserve fuel, each burst lasting maybe 1 to 2 seconds, because 4 gallons of napalm gives you only about 8 to 10 seconds of total firing time. And then you learn about the danger you're in while carrying this weapon. The training instructors are brutally honest about this. Flamethrower operators have the lowest life expectancy of any combat role in the infantry. Enemy soldiers will prioritize you as a target above everyone else. Not just because you're dangerous, but because a single bullet through your fuel tanks turns you into a massive fireball that can kill everyone around you. You're trained to always keep riflemen nearby for protection, to never expose yourself unnecessarily, to take cover constantly, and to have an escape plan for every position you enter. You're also trained in something they don't talk about much in official documents: how to recognize when you need to drop the weapon and run. Because if your fuel tanks are punctured and leaking, if your pressure system is damaged, if anything seems wrong with the weapon, you have seconds to get it off your back before it kills you. There are documented cases of flamethrower operators frantically unbuckling their harness and diving away moments before their weapon exploded. The lucky ones made it, many didn't. But why would any soldier accept this role? Why volunteer to carry the most dangerous weapon in the infantry? Some did it for the tactical importance. Flamethrowers could accomplish missions that no other weapon could: clearing bunkers, destroying fortified positions, creating psychological shock that shattered enemy resistance. Flamethrower operators knew they were often the key to their unit's success. If a platoon was pinned down by an enemy position, the flamethrower could break the stalemate. That knowledge gave the role a certain dark pride. Others did it because of the effectiveness. As terrifying as the weapon was for the operator, it was infinitely more terrifying for the enemy. Many flamethrower operators reported that enemy soldiers would surrender the moment they saw the flamethrower, before it was even fired. The weapon's reputation preceded it. Just carrying it made you powerful. And some did it because they'd seen what the enemy had done, and they wanted revenge. This was especially true in the Pacific Theater, where American Marines fought Japanese defenders who refused to surrender, who would fight to the death in every bunker and cave. After Marines had lost friends clearing positions one at a time with grenades and satchel charges, the flamethrower started to look less like a terrible burden and more like righteous judgment. But what was it actually like to use this weapon in combat? What did it feel like to pull that trigger and send fire streaming toward human beings? And if you want to discover more untold WW2 stories and deadly hidden technologies, subscribe now, because what you're about to see next will blow your mind. Let's walk through a typical combat scenario from the Pacific War. Your Marine company is attacking a Japanese-held ridgeline. Intelligence reports indicate multiple fortified cave positions with interlocking fields of fire. Your squad has been given the mission to clear a specific cave that's been pouring machine gun fire on American positions for 2 days. You're the flamethrower operator. This is your job. You move forward with your squad, staying low, using every bit of cover. Enemy fire is sporadic but accurate. You keep the flamethrower as protected as possible, knowing that one bullet in the wrong place ends everything. Your squad's riflemen move ahead, suppressing enemy positions with covering fire. You follow behind, conserved until you're needed. You reach a position about 20 meters from the cave entrance. This is flamethrower range. Your squad leader signals you forward. Your heart is hammering. Your mouth is dry. The adrenaline is overwhelming. You can see the cave mouth, a dark opening in the hillside, and you know there are Japanese soldiers inside, waiting, watching for you. You move into the open. Bullets immediately snap past you. Your riflemen increase their covering fire, trying to keep enemy heads down. You raise the nozzle assembly, aiming at the cave entrance. You check the pilot light, make sure it's burning. You take a breath. You pull the trigger. The weapon roars to life with a sound like tearing fabric amplified 1,000 times. The fuel ignites at the nozzle with a whooshing sound that you feel in your chest. A stream of fire, a solid rod of orange and yellow flame shoots from the nozzle and arcs toward the cave entrance. The napalm splashes against the cave walls and pours inside like liquid death. The flames illuminate the cave interior with hellish light. You hold the trigger for 3 seconds, sweeping the stream across the cave entrance, making sure the napalm saturates the interior. Then you release. The fuel stream stops, but the fire continues. Inside that cave, everything is burning. The air temperature is lethal. The oxygen is being consumed by the flames. Anyone inside who wasn't killed by the initial blast of fire is dying from heat, toxic fumes, or suffocation. Sometimes, defenders would run from caves that had been hit by flamethrowers. They'd emerge with their uniforms on fire, disoriented, in shock. American riflemen would shoot them not out of cruelty but out of mercy, because burning to death is an agonizing way to die. Sometimes, you'd hear screaming from inside the cave that would continue for 30 seconds, a minute, before finally stopping. Those sounds stayed with you forever. But here's something that rarely gets discussed in official histories. The flamethrower wasn't just a weapon, it was psychological warfare. Many times, flamethrower operators would fire into empty positions or fire demonstration bursts where enemy soldiers could see them, just to spread fear. Enemy defenders who knew there were flamethrowers nearby would sometimes surrender immediately rather than face the possibility of being burned alive. In several documented cases, entire Japanese positions surrendered after seeing a flamethrower demonstration, even though no one had actually been attacked with it yet. The psychological effect worked on American troops too, just in reverse. Having a flamethrower operator in your squad gave you confidence. You knew that no matter how fortified an enemy position was, you had an answer for it. The flamethrower made impossible tactical problems solvable, but it also meant carrying the burden of what you'd witnessed. Many infantry soldiers later reported that watching flamethrowers in action was one of the most disturbing experiences of the war, even when it was happening to the enemy. So why was the flamethrower so uniquely effective against fortified positions? Why couldn't conventional weapons accomplish the same missions? The answer lies in the specific physics of fire in enclosed spaces. When you fire a stream of napalm into a bunker or cave, several deadly effects occur simultaneously. First, the initial impact of burning napalm causes severe burns to anyone in the direct stream. Second, the napalm splashes and spreads throughout the enclosed space, igniting everything it touches. Third, the fire rapidly consumes the available oxygen, creating suffocating conditions within seconds. Fourth, the fire produces toxic gases including carbon monoxide that poison the air. Fifth, the radiant heat raises the ambient temperature to lethal levels, causing severe burns even to people not directly touched by flames. Conventional explosives, like grenades or artillery shells, can damage fortifications and kill defenders through fragmentation and blast effects, but they don't have the sustained area denial effect that fire creates. A grenade explodes and the danger is over within seconds. Survivors can recover and continue fighting. But a position hit with napalm is uninhabitable for minutes or even hours afterward. The fire continues burning, the heat remains intense, the toxic fumes linger, the position is effectively neutralized. This made the flamethrower invaluable for specific tactical situations: bunker clearing, cave clearing, trench clearing, urban combat in fortified buildings. Any scenario where defenders had prepared strong positions that provided protection from conventional weapons. The flamethrower bypassed that protection entirely. Concrete walls that stopped bullets and shell fragments offered no defense against fire that flowed like water and burned at 2,000 degrees. But the weapon had significant limitations that don't always appear in dramatic combat footage. Range was severely limited compared to firearms. 20 to 30 meters was maximum effective range, and that was under ideal conditions. Wind could disperse the fuel stream or blow it off target. Rain could reduce the intensity of the flames. The fuel supply was minuscule, requiring frequent reloading, which could only be done in safe rear areas. And the operator had to get dangerously close to enemy positions to use the weapon effectively. This last limitation was the most critical. While a rifleman could engage targets from 100 meters or more, staying in relatively safe, covered positions, the flamethrower operator had to advance into point-blank range of enemy positions. This meant crossing terrain under fire, exposing yourself completely, and staying exposed while you fired the weapon. Many flamethrower operators were killed not while firing, but while approaching the position they were supposed to attack. And then there was the mechanical unreliability. The flamethrower was a complex system with multiple points of failure. Fuel pumps could malfunction, ignition systems could fail, fuel lines could clog, pressure systems could leak. In the humid, muddy, chaotic conditions of Pacific Island combat, equipment failures were common. There are multiple accounts of flamethrower operators reaching their assault position, pulling the trigger, and having nothing happen. The weapon just doesn't fire. Now you're standing in the open 20 meters from an enemy position, carrying 68 pounds of napalm and a target painted on your back, with a weapon that doesn't work. That scenario killed many operators. The different nations fighting in World War II developed their own flamethrower variants, each with specific design characteristics. The German Flammenwerfer 41 was considered one of the most reliable designs, using a simple pressurization system and relatively stable fuel mixture. It could fire for about 8 seconds at ranges up to 25 meters. German doctrine emphasized using flamethrowers in assault engineer units that specialized in fortification attacks. The Soviet Union deployed flamethrowers extensively on the Eastern Front, using both man-portable units and vehicle-mounted systems. The Rock S2 and Rock S3 were designed to look like standard infantry rifles from a distance, with the fuel tank disguised as a normal backpack, specifically so operators wouldn't be immediately targeted. Soviet flamethrower doctrine emphasized mass employment, with entire specialized flamethrower battalions used in major offensive operations. The British Lifebuoy flamethrower was notorious for its distinctive appearance, with 2 large circular fuel tanks that made operators extremely obvious targets. British forces used flamethrowers less frequently than American or Soviet forces, partly due to the nature of combat in the European theater, where fortified positions were often attacked with tank support rather than infantry alone. But it was the Americans in the Pacific who became most closely associated with flamethrower warfare. The island-hopping campaign against Japan created perfect conditions for flamethrower employment. Nearly every Pacific Island battle involved attacking heavily fortified Japanese positions in caves, bunkers, and pillboxes. Conventional weapons were often ineffective. Artillery could pound Japanese positions for hours without neutralizing them. Infantry attacks would bog down with heavy casualties. But a few flamethrower operators could break these stalemates decisively. The Battle of Iwo Jima in February and March 1945 saw some of the most extensive flamethrower use of the war. The Japanese had prepared the island with over 11,000 cave and bunker positions, many interconnected by tunnels, all carefully camouflaged and mutually supporting. American Marines faced the nightmare scenario of clearing this fortified nightmare yard by yard. Flamethrowers became absolutely essential. Every Marine rifle company had multiple flamethrower operators, and they were in constant demand throughout the month-long battle. One Marine flamethrower operator, Corporal Tony Stein, used his weapon to clear multiple Japanese positions during the initial assault on Iwo Jima. He made 8 separate trips back to the beach to get more ammunition and flamethrower fuel for his squad. He personally cleared at least 20 enemy positions and saved countless Marine lives by eliminating positions that were slaughtering Marines crossing the beach. He was killed in action 2 weeks later and posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. But for every heroic story, there are darker memories that veterans rarely shared. Former flamethrower operators interviewed decades after the war often displayed visible discomfort discussing their experiences. Some refused to talk about it at all. The psychological burden of burning human beings alive, of hearing their screams, of smelling burning flesh, was something that marked you permanently. Many flamethrower operators struggled with nightmares and guilt for the rest of their lives. There's a profound moral weight to using fire as a weapon. Other weapons kill, often in terrible ways, but fire feels different. It feels more personal somehow, more cruel. There's something about burning someone alive that violates a deeply held human taboo. Even soldiers who believed absolutely in their cause, who knew they were fighting against a brutal enemy, still felt haunted by the memory of using flamethrowers. Some veterans later described feeling like they'd crossed a line, done something that couldn't be undone or forgiven, even though they'd been ordered to do it and had saved the lives of their fellow soldiers. After World War II, military forces continued developing and using flamethrowers through the Korean War, Vietnam War, and into the modern era, though with decreasing frequency. The M2 flamethrower replaced the M1A1 in American service, offering improved range and reliability. Vehicle-mounted flamethrowers, particularly those installed on tanks like the Churchill Crocodile or the American M67 flamethrower tank, provided much greater fuel capacity and protection for the operators. These vehicle systems could fire sustained streams for nearly a minute, with ranges exceeding 50 meters. But as military technology advanced, the tactical role of flamethrowers diminished. Thermobaric weapons, which create similar effects using explosive pressure waves and burning atmospheric oxygen, largely replaced flamethrowers for bunker clearing. Precision-guided munitions allowed forces to destroy fortified positions without requiring soldiers to advance into point-blank range. Modern combat doctrine shifted away from the bloody direct assaults that made flamethrowers necessary. Today, most military forces have retired man-portable flamethrowers from active service. They're considered controversial weapons under international law, with some arguing they violate the prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. The United States military officially ceased using man-portable flamethrowers in 1978, though vehicle-mounted incendiary systems remain in limited use. But the legacy of the flamethrower extends far beyond its military applications. It represents something significant about the nature of technological warfare and human psychology. The flamethrower worked not primarily because it was an efficient killing tool, though it was devastatingly effective in specific situations. It worked because it exploited primal fear. Because humans have feared fire since before we were fully human. Because burning alive is one of the most horrifying deaths imaginable, and the prospect of that death could break even the most disciplined soldiers. This raises uncomfortable questions about the ethics of weapon design. Should militaries deliberately create weapons designed to maximize psychological terror? Is it more humane to use weapons that kill instantly or weapons that create such fear that enemies surrender without fighting? The flamethrower forces us to confront these questions because its effects were so visceral and its psychological impact so extreme. Veterans who faced flamethrowers in combat described a specific type of fear unlike anything else on the battlefield. Artillery could kill you instantly without warning. Snipers could kill you from invisible positions. Machine guns could cut you down in seconds. But the flamethrower was different. You could see it coming. You knew what was about to happen. And there was a terrible moment of understanding before the fire reached you. That psychological dimension made the flamethrower uniquely terrifying, even compared to weapons that were statistically more lethal. The engineering that went into perfecting the flamethrower was remarkable, separate from the moral questions about its use. Creating a portable system that could project ignited fuel in a coherent stream for 20 to 30 meters required solving significant technical challenges. The fuel mixture had to be precisely calibrated to flow smoothly while remaining thick enough to stick to targets. The pressurization system had to provide consistent pressure despite variations in temperature and altitude. The ignition system had to work reliably in rain, wind, mud, and extreme heat. The entire assembly had to be light enough for one soldier to carry while durable enough to withstand combat conditions. The napalm fuel formula itself represents sophisticated chemistry. Early versions were simply gasoline with soap powder added to thicken it. Later versions used aluminum soaps and other additives to create a gel that would stick to vertical surfaces and burn even underwater for short periods. The fuel was designed to burn at temperatures high enough to ignite wood, cloth, and flesh almost instantly, while producing thick smoke that added to the psychological effect. Some formulas included phosphorus additives that would cause secondary ignition, making the fire extremely difficult to extinguish. But perhaps the most significant aspect of flamethrower development was the recognition that psychological effect mattered as much as physical damage. Military researchers studying flamethrower effectiveness found that the weapon's value wasn't measured just in enemy casualties. It was measured in positions captured without resistance, in enemies who surrendered rather than fight, in attacks that succeeded because defenders broke and ran when they saw flames. The flamethrower was as much a psychological weapon as a physical one, and it was designed with that dual purpose in mind. This psychological dimension extended to friendly forces as well. Units that included flamethrower operators showed improved morale and combat effectiveness, not because the flamethrower killed more enemies, but because soldiers felt more confident knowing they had an answer for fortified positions. The presence of flamethrowers made impossible tasks seem possible. That psychological boost to friendly forces multiplied the weapon's overall effectiveness. Looking back at the flamethrower's role in World War II, we see a weapon that was simultaneously essential and horrifying. Essential because it solved tactical problems that no other weapon could address effectively. Horrifying because of what it did to human beings and what it required operators to become. The flamethrower represents war at its most primal and most disturbing. It took the oldest weapon, fire, and turned it into a precision instrument of modern warfare. The result was something that both sides feared and relied upon, a weapon that won battles and haunted the people who used it. The stories of individual flamethrower operators deserve to be remembered, not just as tactical details in military history, but as human experiences of extraordinary courage and terrible burden. These soldiers volunteered or were assigned to carry the most dangerous weapon in the infantry. They accepted casualty rates that would be considered unacceptable for any other role. They performed missions that required advancing into point-blank range of enemy positions while carrying explosive fuel on their backs. They lived with the psychological weight of what they'd done long after the fighting ended. Many flamethrower operators received little recognition for their service. The nature of their weapon was so controversial and disturbing that few wanted to talk about it, including the operators themselves. Unit citations would mention that enemy positions were neutralized or cleared without specifying how. Combat reports used clinical language like flame weapons employed to describe events that were anything but clinical in reality. Yet without these soldiers and their terrible weapon, the Pacific War would have been even bloodier and longer. Every Japanese cave system on Iwo Jima, every fortified position on Okinawa, every bunker on Saipan would have required direct assault by regular infantry with conventional weapons. The casualty rates from such assaults were catastrophic. Flamethrowers, for all their horror, saved lives by ending battles more quickly and forcing surrenders that might not have occurred otherwise. This is the paradox of the flamethrower. A weapon designed to inflict the most terrible death imaginable also prevented deaths by making resistance futile. A weapon that traumatized the soldiers who used it also saved their comrades' lives. A weapon that represented the worst of human cruelty in war also demonstrated desperate pragmatism in the face of impossible tactical situations. The flamethrower's story is ultimately a story about the nature of modern warfare and the terrible choices it forces on people. In a perfect world, such weapons wouldn't exist. In a perfect world, wars wouldn't happen. But World War II wasn't a perfect world. It was a desperate struggle where the stakes included the survival of entire nations and peoples. In that context, militaries developed and deployed weapons like the flamethrower not because they wanted to, but because the alternative, failing to defeat enemies who were equally desperate and ruthless, was unacceptable. Understanding the flamethrower means understanding this uncomfortable truth. War creates situations where the least terrible option is still terrible, where saving lives requires taking lives in horrifying ways, where soldiers carry psychological burdens that never fully heal. The flamethrower crystallizes these truths in a way that other weapons don't, because its effects are so visceral and so obviously cruel. If you loved discovering the deadly secrets of WW2 weapons and the incredible yet terrifying engineering that went into the flamethrower, make sure to subscribe. We're diving deep into more untold stories, hidden technologies, and the weapons that changed history forever. The next video reveals the secret aircraft that flew missions so dangerous pilots called them suicide runs, and the technology that somehow kept them alive. Subscribe now and you'll see it the moment it drops.